Somewhere in the Alaskan interior, there's a lake bigger than the state of Delaware, and almost nobody outside Alaska has ever heard its name. Pilots have logged strange sightings over its surface since the 1940s. Fishermen have hauled up nets torn apart by something they can't identify. Indigenous communities have passed down warnings about its depths for generations before any outsider ever set foot on its shores. And for more than 80 years, one question has refused to go away. What is actually living in the deep water of Lake Iliamna? Lake Iliamna sits in the southwest corner of Alaska, roughly 200 miles from the nearest paved road, in a region so remote that most of the people who live near it get around by bush plane rather than car. It's the largest lake in the state, the 8th largest natural freshwater lake in the entire United States, stretching about 75 miles from end to end and up to 20 miles across at its widest point. Its surface covers well over 1,000 square miles, an area roughly the size of Rhode Island. Its bottom drops into basins that plunge past 900 feet in places, and a meaningful portion of that lake bed has never been fully surveyed with modern equipment. That's not because anyone is hiding something down there. It's because the region is remote, the weather turns violent with almost no warning, and there has simply never been enough economic or scientific incentive for anyone to map every square foot of a lake this size in a place this hard to reach. The lake connects to Bristol Bay, and from there to the Pacific Ocean, through the Kvichak River, a relatively short waterway that happens to carry one of the largest sockeye salmon runs on the planet. Tens of millions of fish move through that river and into the lake every single year, arriving in a wave that turns the water into a kind of highway for anything that eats salmon for a living. And wherever that much salmon travels, predators tend to follow. That single geographic fact, that Iliamna is a freshwater lake with a narrow but real connection to the open ocean, is a hinge the entire mystery swings on. It means marine and anadromous animals aren't necessarily locked out of this lake the way they would be in a landlocked body of water. Some could plausibly get in, and some could plausibly stay. The Dena'ina and Yupik peoples have lived along Iliamna's shores for thousands of years, long before Alaska was a U.S. territory, let alone a state. Their oral traditions describe something living in the lake's deep water, something powerful enough to overturn a boat, something you gave a wide, respectful distance if you notice a disturbance on the surface that didn't match the wind, the current, or a school of feeding fish. These weren't campfire tales invented purely to entertain children or frighten outsiders. In a landscape where falling into cold water can kill a person in a matter of minutes, oral guidance about respecting the lake and staying clear of unexplained movement was, at the very least, sound practical wisdom passed down through survival, whether or not there was one specific creature behind every warning. It's worth remembering that indigenous oral tradition in this region has repeatedly proven accurate about far more than folklore. It's guided generations through subsistence fishing, weather reading, and travel across genuinely dangerous terrain. Dismissing it outright as pure superstition says more about outside assumptions than it does about the reliability of the knowledge itself. Outside attention to the lake picked up significantly in the 20th century, largely because small aircraft became the standard way people moved around rural Alaska. Bush pilots spend an enormous amount of their working life flying low and slow over lakes and rivers, scanning terrain, watching for weather, checking water conditions before landing. Over the decades, a number of them have reported seeing large shapes moving beneath the surface of Iliamna that they couldn't easily explain as fish, seals, floating logs, or shadows cast by clouds. These aren't reports from random tourists glancing out a window. Bush pilots survive professionally by being the kind of people who don't misread terrain, wildlife, or water conditions, because getting it wrong in that environment can be fatal. That doesn't automatically make every single account accurate. Human perception is fallible, distance and altitude distort scale, and light on water plays tricks on everyone. But it is genuinely notable that trained, cautious professional observers have, independently and across different years, described the same basic phenomenon. Something large, moving with apparent purpose, in a lake that isn't supposed to contain anything that big. By the late 1970s, the accumulated weight of these stories had built up enough of a local and then regional reputation that the Anchorage Daily News decided to get involved directly. In 1979, the paper publicly offered a cash reward, widely reported at around $100,000, to anyone who could produce solid, verifiable proof of what people in the region had started calling the Lake Iliamna monster, or locally, simply Ili. That reward is real. It's documented in the paper's own archives and in subsequent regional reporting, and it's one of the few hard, undisputed facts anchoring this entire story. The offer drew serious attention from wildlife researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators alike, and for a while it pushed a regional folk legend into something that functioned like an actual open investigation, complete with expeditions, equipment, and genuine scientific curiosity rather than pure tabloid spectacle. The reward was never claimed. Nobody produced a body. Nobody captured a specimen. Nobody obtained a photograph or a piece of footage clear and verifiable enough to settle the question one way or the other. But the attempt to answer the challenge did produce something genuinely valuable. It forced serious people to take the mundane, scientifically grounded explanation seriously, rather than jumping straight to unknown creature as a default answer. The leading scientific candidate, and the one most researchers who've looked into this take most seriously, is a Pacific sleeper shark. Sleeper sharks are cold water, deep water predators found throughout the North Pacific. Closely related to the Greenland shark of the North Atlantic, a species famous among biologists for growing past 20 feet in length and living for centuries, making it one of the longest-lived vertebrates known to science. Pacific sleeper sharks are slow-moving, patient ambush predators that prefer exactly the kind of cold, dark, deep conditions Lake Iliamna offers in abundance. Documented specimens have exceeded 14 feet in length, and some marine biologists believe larger individuals are entirely plausible given how little of the species has actually been studied in the wild. Critically, sleeper sharks are known to tolerate a range of salinity levels, and since millions of salmon already make the trip up the Kritchak River every single year without issue, it isn't a scientific stretch to suggest that an occasional shark could follow that same food source upstream into the lake, at least temporarily, or perhaps even establish a small resident population over time. The sleeper shark theory explains a great deal. It explains the reported size of the animals witnesses describe. It explains why sightings are rare, brief, and hard to document clearly, since these are naturally deep-dwelling animals that avoid surface waters and bright light whenever possible. It plausibly accounts for the torn nets and the occasional violent encounter between something powerful and a small boat, since sleeper sharks are large enough and strong enough to do real physical damage if they collide with or become entangled in fishing gear. What the theory doesn't fully close is every detail in every report. Some witnesses over the decades have described what looked like multiple large animals moving together in apparent coordination, and that isn't typical sleeper shark behavior, since they are generally understood to be solitary hunters rather than pack animals. That gap doesn't disprove the sleeper shark hypothesis. It simply means a theory, however solid, doesn't neatly resolve every single account on record, and honest science has to sit with that kind of incomplete fit rather than force a tidy conclusion. Other proposed explanations are less dramatic, but just as scientifically reasonable. White sturgeon, a species capable of growing enormous, sometimes exceeding 10 feet in length and hundreds of pounds in weight, are documented in various Pacific Northwest river systems, and misidentified large fish remain one of the most common, well-established sources of lake monster reports around the world, from Scotland to Canada to here in Alaska. Beluga whales have also been documented traveling unusually far upriver in pursuit of fish, occasionally showing up in freshwater systems far from where people expect to encounter them, and a pale, partially submerged shape glimpsed briefly and at a distance could plausibly be mistaken for something far stranger than a lost, hungry whale. None of these explanations require inventing a new species or an undiscovered lineage of ancient predator. They only require remembering that the natural world already contains large, powerful animals capable of startling people who go into an encounter not expecting to see them. As for the physical damage regularly cited in these stories, torn nets, scraped hulls, occasional hard, sudden impact against the bottom of a small boat, none of it is unique to Lake Iliamna, and none of it strictly requires an undiscovered predator to explain it. A large fish thrashing violently while caught in a net can absolutely shred it beyond repair. A submerged log, a chunk of drifting lake ice, or a large startled animal suddenly bolting can strike a hull hard enough to genuinely alarm the people aboard and leave visible damage behind. That's not a dismissal of the people who've experienced this firsthand, and it's not an accusation that they are lying or exaggerating. It's simply an acknowledgement that something powerful hit my boat is consistent with several known, real, entirely ordinary animals and objects, not exclusively with an unclassified creature lurking in the depths. It's also worth being direct about something that gets exaggerated a lot in online retellings of this story. No credible, peer-reviewed environmental DNA study has ever definitively identified an unknown species living in Lake Iliamna. Claims to that effect circulate widely across social media and low-quality content mills, but they don't trace back to any verifiable, published, peer-reviewed research. If a study like that genuinely existed and held up under scientific scrutiny, it would represent one of the most significant wildlife discoveries in modern North American history, and it would not be quietly sitting in obscurity waiting to be referenced in passing on the internet. The honest, sober state of the evidence, as it actually exists today, looks like this: real, repeated eyewitness reports from credible, experienced observers spanning multiple decades. One real and genuinely unclaimed cash reward from a respected regional newspaper. Several plausible, scientifically grounded natural explanations that account for most of the reported details, and no confirmed physical proof, specimen, or verified footage of anything unclassified. That might sound like a letdown if you came into this expecting a confirmed, undiscovered monster. But it's actually the more interesting story, because it represents a real, ongoing scientific question rather than a settled myth wrapped up with a bow. Lake Iliamna remains one of the least thoroughly surveyed large lakes in North America. Nobody has conducted a comprehensive, modern sonar and environmental DNA survey of its deepest basins using today's technology. The honest truth is that we don't fully know everything that's living down there, not because of some cover-up or conspiracy, but simply because almost no one has looked closely enough for long enough with sufficiently advanced equipment to say anything with total certainty. There's also a broader, genuinely fascinating pattern worth mentioning here. Lake monster legends exist in remote, cold, deep lakes all over the world. Loch Ness in Scotland, Agapago in Lake Okanagan in British Columbia, Champion Lake Champlain along the Vermont-New York border, and others, and skeptics often lump all of these stories together as pure folklore with zero grounding in reality. But there's a real, established biological mechanism that makes at least some version of these stories more scientifically plausible than pure invention. During past ice ages, sea levels and glacial coverage were dramatically different than they are today, and some lakes that are now landlocked, only loosely connected to the ocean, were, at various points in the past, more directly linked to marine environments. It's entirely possible, and geologically supported, that in some of these lakes, marine or anadromous species became trapped or gradually settled in as the surrounding geography shifted over thousands of years, and that their descendants have persisted quietly in isolation ever since, living out their lives in cold, deep water without ever being clearly observed, documented, or studied by humans. That scenario doesn't require inventing a monster. It only requires accepting the fairly mundane idea that a fish, shark, or marine mammal population might exist in a specific lake that nobody has ever bothered to formally and thoroughly survey. What we can say with real confidence, based only on what's actually documented, is this: Lake Iliamna is real, enormous, and genuinely remote. Its indigenous oral histories genuinely describe respect and caution around something powerful believed to inhabit its depths. Bush pilots and commercial and subsistence fishermen have genuinely reported unexplained sightings across multiple separate decades. And a real regional newspaper really did put up real money for definitive proof that, to this day, nobody has ever successfully collected. Whether what's actually down there is a rare Pacific sleeper shark that followed the salmon run upriver, an oversized white sturgeon that nobody's bothered to formally catch, tag, and measure, a lost beluga whale glimpsed at the wrong angle in pole light, or simply the natural human tendency of a cold, dark, mostly unmapped lake to generate legend out of shadow, distance, and imagination, that part of the story remains genuinely, honestly open. Maybe that's the most accurate way to end this. Not with a monster definitively confirmed, and not with the entire mystery dismissed as nothing either, but with a plain, verifiable fact that there's a 1,000-square-mile lake in the Alaskan wilderness that very few people have ever really looked into carefully and thoroughly, all the way down to its deepest, coldest basins. Until someone finally does that work properly, Ili remains exactly what it has been for thousands of years, a story the water keeps mostly to itself, shared only in fragments, through the people who live along its shores and the pilots who fly low enough on the right clear day to catch a glimpse of something moving beneath the surface that they still can't fully explain. So which explanation do you find more convincing? A rare, oversized shark that followed the salmon in from the Pacific, or something science genuinely hasn't identified yet? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into real mysteries that science hasn't fully closed a book on, go ahead and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.